Let's talk about maintenance contract task scheduling in WennSoft signature software. First, a definition of terms. A maintenance contract is an agreement to perform specific PM work at a location. Contract coverage defines the specific equipment to be covered. The contract task list show the default tasks added to the contract. And contract task codes are those specific tasks to be performed. Now, when a task list is modified or task codes are modified, they're done at the contract level, and we then define them as contract task lists and contract task codes. The task frequency is the cycle of frequency of the preventative maintenance. Once we've defined the frequency, we need to also define the schedule. For example, if the frequency is quarterly, then we must define what month of the quarter it starts in, either January, February, or March. Similarly, if it's biannual, we must define the starting month so that the following follow-up visit can happen 6 months after. If the frequency is monthly, we could define specific months for which we want coverage, or just accept all months of the year as covered. We can also define a specific day of the month for specific tasks to be performed. This is our contract window. It shows us an overview of the contract, things like start date, expiration date, dollar value, and so on. On the right-hand side, we have a coverage button. And it's this coverage window that's going to define what equipment is covered for this specific contract. We can see here we've got several cooling towers and pumps. But notice cooling tower number 1, that's highlighted here, is in the sublocation Tower Yard West. But notice down below, CT4 is Tower YD West. So by abbreviating yard as YD, the two cooling towers that are in the Tower Yard West are not grouped together in sublocations. It's very important when entering equipment that sublocations be spelled identically so that within Mobile Tech, equipment will be grouped together. Now, on the coverage window, if I click the equipment button, this is the window that would be used to add or remove equipment from the contract. What we see on the left-hand side is a grid that contains all equipment at the location. On the right-hand side, we see a grid of all equipment that is currently added to the contract. If I highlight something on the left, I can then click the Insert button and add it to the contract. Similarly, if I highlight an equipment that's covered on the right-hand side, I could click the Remove button to remove it from the contract. Notice highlighted in the middle left of the window, there's two check marks. Automatically add equipment task list when inserting. Now we want to make sure that these check boxes are always checked. They are checked by default when this window is opened, but it is that check mark that's going to add the default task list for the equipment types that are in the system. Next, if we go to the coverage window and click the task codes button, we will see the specific task codes that have been added automatically when the task lists were added to the system, to the contract. Now, what we see here in the middle grid is all task codes that are in the system. At the bottom of the window, we see the grid of the default task codes that were added when the equipment was added to the contract. Similarly to the other window, I can highlight a task code in the middle grid and insert it, to the contract, or I could highlight a task code that's on this piece of equipment and remove it. Now in the contract coverage window, I can locate the hours task. We create a generic hours piece of equipment so that we can schedule our hours for the contract as a whole. By highlighting the hours and clicking the Task Schedule button in the lower right of the window, I can open this window where I can add the specific number of hours for each of the contract coverage months. And I also must make sure that the required check mark is marked so that we can have a service call automatically created with those hours on it. Let's talk a little bit about contract scheduling strategy. Particularly if we have a large environment or a large building with a lot of different equipment types and a lot of different locations around the building. We want to group the equipment for coverage in a logical way that a technician might move around the building. For example, we would want to group all of the rooftop units, scheduling them together to be done on a single service call in a single day. Also, if we're going to send a boiler technician with boiler expertise, we want to make sure that we're grouping all the boiler equipment together for that service call to be done on a different day. Considering type of equipment is a part of that expertise, the difference between a refrigeration guy or a boiler guy. Chiller expertise is also another type of equipment that we might want to consider. We also would want to group common tasks together. We could send a lower level technician, a helper technician to do coil cleanings, and when he goes to the rooftop, you want all rooftop units to be grouped together and have the coil cleanings done all at once while he's got his coil cleaning equipment there. Similarly, a follow-up technician might come to just focus on belt and filter changes, and that would be scheduled on a different day. And lastly, the experienced refrigeration technician could come with his specialty equipment to measure refrigerant pressures, temperatures, all of those other tasks that need to be done for a spring startup on a refrigeration unit. All of these tasks should be separated to different days of the month so that multiple service calls will be created and can be assigned to specific technicians. When grouping equipment together, consider the building ID and room number, but more importantly, the sublocation. We want the sublocations to be spelled identically so that they could be grouped properly, unlike the cooling towers we saw at the beginning of this presentation. This is our contracts task scheduling window. It's opened from the additional button at the contract window, and you can see at the top the contract that has been selected is grayed out. It just lets you know that this is the specific one that we're working on. The grid on the bottom shows all equipment and all tasks currently on the contract. We will use the filtering buttons or the radio buttons for viewing frequency or schedule to determine what we're going to look at on the grid. And we want to focus on filtering, specifically grouping tasks together, for example, yearly frequency tasks. By default, all tasks are scheduled, all yearly tasks are scheduled for January. So we would obviously, if there's a different starting month or a different month for the annual visit, we would want to highlight all of the frequencies that are yearly, filter the list by clicking redisplay, and then we can mark all or select specific pieces of equipment that we want to change. The change frequency and schedule will be selected in the top center. You can see that I've selected yearly and the month of April. And when I click the update button, all of these tasks that have been selected will be changed to yearly in April. Now, if we're going to do different types of equipment, such as boilers, I could filter for that equipment type or specific equipment IDs, specific equipment locations, or task lists that would allow me to set those specific task lists or specific equipment types to a different month, for example, August for boiler equipment. Next, I can select a specific day of the month after filtering my list to display coil cleanings. As you see here, I've selected the yearly coil cleaning task code and then selected the schedule radio button at the top left. And I can then select a separate day of the month for these coil cleanings to happen. By default, all tasks are going to be done at the first of the month. By selecting the second, I can then roll down that different day so that all coil cleanings will be grouped on a single service call for that day of the month. We can also accommodate odd task scheduling. The example here would be a building where the package units on the roof would have filter changes done every month during the summer, but not at all during the winter. So by choosing the right filters, highlighting and marking the check marks for these specific units and the filter change, I can then mark all of the summer months and update the list to change the frequency. All of these specific tasks are further defined in training scripts, but this is just our overview of how this utility will work for you. Thank you.